Welcome to the Liberty Alert with Gregory Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C., a program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking two-kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C., and friends of the program all around the country. I'm Gregory Seltz. Welcome to the Liberty Alert, where every week we try to cut through the noise and take on the issues, especially the public issues that matter to people of faith. Today, I'm privileged to have on the program Eric Eichinger, best-selling author, pastor, father, husband. I mean, he does it all. We're not exactly contemporaries. He's a little bit younger. And the other side of it is does so many wonderful things, so many great things, but he also is a Michigan State grad. So that is a problem sometimes in our dialogue. But Eric, it's great to have you today.
Thank you, Greg. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Well, listen, I've got you on today because, I just read your latest book, Lord of the Legends, Jesus Redemption Quest. And I loved it. Okay. And I know you've done a book on Eric Liddell. I do want to talk about that another time as well. And so this whole thing about being an author, being a person who's writing best-selling novels, really, in today's marketplace. And that's the kind of thing for me, because as I thought about what you're doing, and then I think about the kind of things I'm having to do in Washington, D.C., I think the marketplace has changed, but obviously the need is the same. So tell us why you decided to write this particular book, and or maybe even give us a journey into what made you the author you are today.
Well, yeah, it kind of goes back. I was a theater major at my alma mater, as you pointed out, Michigan State, and so my
Sparty be gone.
my joke is always like, well, if I'm not a good pastor, at least I can act like I'm a good pastor.
That's good. I like that.
But they always say to write what you know, and
okay.
So I as you pointed out, so I'm a pastor. I was trained in the Lutheran Church in St. Louis and at the seminary there, but I was also a missionary in China with the Lutheran Church, and I met my wife over there, and then I ran in college and in high school, and so just a lot of successes there. And so as a kid, Chariots of Fire was like this huge thing for me.
Yeah,
and it just really a real touchstone and inspired me. And so as I got older, I recognized my life oddly paralleled his in many ways, and just the theology, and he was a missionary to China and a runner, and he even met his wife over there and such. And his name is Eric, haha. But for a kid, that's a big deal.
It's huge.
That's a hero looking up. So as I got to seminary, I just put all of those things together, and I went on this little pilgrimage of my own to go see where he died in China during World War II. And so I found his grave, and it was just this real moment for me. So I wanted to sort of do a Chariots of Fire sequel or something like that. Right. And I wrote a screenplay, and I started to get some attention with that and some friends and networking. And the more I talked about that, they're like, well, how did, can you write a biography about him? And I'm like, oh man, so that's really how the doorway into writing came, and Tyndale House gave me a nice contract for writing a biography, and that's The Final Race with Eric Liddell. And so,
and before I let you jump on, because I know we're not going to talk about that book today, but
right.
I loved what you said about it, because I'm an urban guy. I left a church that was a dynamic church in Florida, and I wound up going to New York City, then eventually South Central LA. And people always thought I was crazy. Why would you leave something that was successful and growing and had all these, well, because you go to the places where people say the church isn't strong anymore, and you try to share with people who say we don't need it anymore. And I think that's kind of the thing that motivated you to go to China, because a lot of people probably thought, why are you doing that, right?
Yeah, the missionary mindset was always very intriguing for me growing up, probably because of Eric Liddell, but then I went to a Christian high school and grade school. And so you go to, these big Division I universities that are very secular. And so all of a sudden it means something to be a Christian. And so, but the church that I was involved with in college was just very mindful of being proactive about sharing your faith. And so I just really enjoyed all of that. And I got to live in New York for a couple of years as a youth director, and that even a little bit more. And so, just the here I am, Lord, send me was a very powerful thing. And
Cool.
so, I guess a long end around way to get back to Lord of Legends and the desire of why to write. As a pastor, we preach in pulpits. And so I view, if you're trying to make a movie, or if, musicians are trying to, have an album, or if you're having a book published, I view them as a different type of pulpit. Right. And so, a lot of times people will say, like, as a pastor, oh, it's, whose glory is this for and stuff. But all of my material is pointing to Jesus. So sure. I just see it, and that's true for the pastor that preaches a great sermon, and people will say, oh, wow, it can go to your head, or pride and humility issues. We're always struggling with those tensions as Christians, as pastors, as people. But that's my healthy handle on why I write and why I try to share the message of Christ in unique ways. And I look at the publishing industry as just another unique pulpit.
Well, and first of all, like I said, I purchased the book, I read the book, I love the book. So I think people, if you want a book that you can read, that will, it will even take some of the things that your kids are watching on television, the movies that they're seeing, and it'll show you how it drives back to the source. It drives back to the real Lord of the Legends, the one that is the reality from whence all these other ones come. In fact, as I read through this, I said, I wonder, what the market will be for this book, because you have this way of pointing back to the original. And that's really contrary to how a lot of things go today. A lot of things go like, well, there is no original. We're just always progressively going to the future, and we're deconstructing the past all the time. You're kind of taking the old tack of saying, no, there was an original. These were spinoffs. Let's talk about why they actually help us understand the original in a new and a fresh way. So how do the challenge of writing that book in today's milieu, or is it just another opportunity because there's not many of them out there?
Yeah. There's this concept in the writing of the hero called the hero's journey. And a lot of people are familiar with that. And a lot of people would say, oh, I don't know Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And yet they do, because it's so well ingrained into our story process. So George Lucas with Star Wars has been running for 40 plus years now. And that style of storytelling, where there's a particular pattern of events and sequences that a hero will go on. And so we start to see all of these hero movies, and it can be a Nacho Libre. I mean, not like your biggest hero type of a character. And yet there's always a call to adventure, a refusal of the call, the crossing of the threshold into this new world. There's usually a mentor figure that provides them different resources or weapons or a map or something. And then there's a dark villain, and there's allies and adversaries. And then there's some big moment of truth, and often the character will experience some type of death, or even a physical death, but then this magical return with this new epiphany, and then a return back to the old world. And so and I just had a lot of fun studying this in storytelling and theater and writing, and just absorbing movies and books, and recognizing this is Jesus' glory story. And they're really kind of pulling back on this. So then the deeper question about how do you get back to Jesus, because you can look back at the ancient Greco-Roman sources, and the hero's pattern is there as well with a lot of these great characters. And it's so fun. I could go on for hours, but like you look at like Hephaestus, who is this iron maker of weapons, and it's like that, you look at Iron Man today, and it's like, where did that come from? Or you look at Mercury or Hermes, and the messenger god with the wings on his feet, and you look at the Flash, and Wonder Woman and Athena, and so it goes on and on. But they say, well, Jesus is only 2,000 years old, so these stories came before that. How do you explain that? And it's like, well, Jesus, the man, sure, 2,000 years, but Christ, the Genesis. Son of God, now we're all the way back to, the beginning of time. And so you go back to the Tower of Babel and the language scrambling, and and they have all those people know those stories of the ancients of where did, God, creation of man, the fall of man, and this proto-evangelion. There we go,
Yeah.
Greg.
Yeah, there you go. We got to
Gospel,
explain
right?
that now. Come on.
Okay. Right in Genesis chapter 3, there
go.
is the first gospel, which is this promise, the whole concept of the promised one, the chosen one will come. And so people, even at the Tower of Babel in years ago, or Babel, people like to say they babbled, they would go in different directions with different languages, but they remembered those stories. And so you sit around the fire, you start coming up with your own stories, and it's very easy to understand how this telephone game of hints of truth are there, but then they create their own things and their own characters and their own stories, and we still see it today. And so that's why there's embers of Christ's truth in all of these hero redemptive stories.
Well, I think you're right too. In fact, one of my favorite movies is Gran Torino, and if you look in Gran Torino, he's a Christ-like figure.
Oh yeah,
he gives of himself so others might be free. So he takes on the punishment, takes the bad guys down with him. When they think they're winning, they lose. All those things are in there, and you start to say, wait a minute. And when they do these stories wrong, I think when they deconstruct and kind of create a whole new way, I think they're doing that with the Harry Potter movies now. They're creating a different, not like the originals. The originals had kind of Christ-like themes in there too. And now we're trying to secularize those things as if we can. And I think you start to realize, no, it's not the same. It's not as good.
Yeah, there used to be a much clearer demarcation of the, good guys wear white, bad guys wear black, right, just that stark difference. But now it's the rise of the anti-hero.
The anti-hero,
and that's the thing where they have all of these shades of gray and all of these things. And then it's all about the self-actualization of the hero and all of your, things. And it kind of pairs with the sinner saint, because as Christians, it's not like we don't have sin. And yet the world tells us that we should be the hero in our life, in our world. But in reality, it's Christ who is our hero.
Yes, Christ is our, exactly.
I think Tolkien does the best with this. Is the hero is Frodo, but or Bilbo, depending on the story, but like they're always like these bumbling figures that need help,
right,
as opposed to Superman or Batman or whatever.
Right. Well, and that's what I love about what you did with this. I look at this too and say, the kinds of things you were saying. Look at this hero who's kind of a chip off the block. Well, let me tell you about the block. Let me bring you back to the original source. Well, it's the same thing we do in Washington. We have these temporal liberties here in Washington, these First Amendment liberties in Washington, and people don't realize there's a source to that. There's a resource to that. In fact, one of my favorite books, one of the guys we've interviewed on our program, he talked about how liberty and freedom are not American concepts. They're biblical truths that America just seems to have brought into its politics. And so I think that sometimes we can look at the blessings we have, and if we dig deeper, maybe we actually see the real source. And isn't that the motivation that you had for writing the way you did?
Yeah. I think what might pair well with that thought is the whole true myth concept that Tolkien would write about. And this, if people know Tolkien and his friendship with C.S. Lewis, they're both World War I vets, and World War I really rocked their world, obviously. Sure. But Tolkien's the Christian and C.S. Lewis is the atheist. But Tolkien's sharing with C.S. Lewis about this true myth, trying to get him to understand the truth of Jesus and everything. And so the Christian would say, well, Jesus isn't a myth. That wasn't Tolkien's point. It's just C.S. Lewis was hung up on all of the doctrine of the Christian church. And so to go back to the original source that you say is like everything that is written about, that we talk about, it's like, just go back to the story, and that's the true origin. And so it was through that whole true myth concept that C.S. Lewis was able to have his heart softened and to kind of explore that and really fall in love with just the glory story aspect of God sending his son and then dying and rising. And then from that, everything else is built upon it with the words. But to start with like pure doctrine, it's so challenging. So I think too, let's go back to the concept of freedom and where does that come from and why do we enjoy it? Yeah, because I think the two biggest things for Americans to define is who is God and what is freedom.
Right. And if you don't know who God is, then you're not going to know what freedom is. And I think that's what's, and that's the challenge today. I think I love to read. Now, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but what Chesterton was actually what both of those guys read too, right? I mean, Chesterton was older than Lewis and Tolkien. Is that correct? Didn't they read some of his stuff?
They could have read Chesterton, but no, there's another guy that wrote some of the fairy tales.
Okay. Well, anyway, the reason why I love Chesterton, because Chesterton had the same kind of journey as Lewis, and he's kind of the guy I read for the work I do. And, he took on all the modern philosophers and just took them to their logical ends, and then finally realized that they're going nowhere. And so he finally found the source, which was Jesus too. And he said it this way. He said, good politics cannot save us, good politics cannot save us, but bad politics can destroy us. And so that's our summary of him. He said it this way. He said, the problem with politics is that liberals keep creating bad laws and conservatives keep conserving them. And so, but for me, what he was always trying to do is get us back to the source. There's a deeper source that makes these liberties possible. There's a deeper source that makes forgiveness possible, mercy possible, love possible. So you can't disconnect those things from the source and have them. And I think that's what you're doing with your writing. You're actually using these things to get back to the source so that you can enjoy the source and the myths that were spawned by it, right?
Exactly. So, I think that's an excellent connection. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you one thing about the book now, too. What was your favorite one? You had different chapters where you took different characters and then, kind of drew them back towards the gospel message of Christ. What was your favorite chapter, or did you have one?
Well, I had a lot of fun with the resurrection, which is the ultimate boon, and that's always this. If you're watching any movie or story or character, they get to like the lowest point, and then it's magical to see like how does the day get saved in a way that you can't see it. And so no one sees Jesus rising from the dead, because that's a supernatural event, and the natural would be to just you die and you stay dead. So nobody sees it happening. And so and it's changed the world, for all of eternity. So writing that, it was hard to come up with an actual character that died physically and rises back. And so you can play around with like Superman, and I got to write about my Superman comic book collection. They famously killed Superman, but then it's like it's a joke because he was actually from Krypton and he was in a sleeping coma because he wasn't human. So they had to explain it away. They couldn't actually say he physically died and rose back. But with the resurrection though, I played a lot with the concept of the phoenix. And so the phoenix rising out of the ashes. And so it was really fun to do a deep dive into where does that mythology come from. And I think readers will be very interested to explore that. The phoenix has some biblical God's word connections to its very origin.
I love that chapter too, by the way. That I was thinking the same thing. I was hoping you were going to go there with that one. Cool. Because that's just one you wouldn't expect. All the other particulars, you're like, oh, I've heard about that. This is like, whoa. And I know what the phoenix is all about, rising up from the ashes. But man, with the deep dive there, that really helped kind of push. And again, we're in the glow of Easter. We're definitely talking about it.
Well, and a quick way to help people understand where we're going with that too. It's like, are unicorns real? Well, no, a horse with a thing. But then when you look at one of the ancient Greek historians, and he's describing on a trip to India, a rhinoceros, and he says it's a whitish purple horse-like figure with a horn coming out of its head. So then when the telephone game gets back, there's the whole concept of the unicorn. So it's like, so now you see the true myth, and so what all that is, and that's that whole concept, So.
Yeah, that's great, man. All right. Moving forward a little bit. I mean, again, your life is, I think you're moving to California if I got that right, or has that happened already?
No, that's happening early this summer. So,
okay. Yeah. Well, I know the church, because you're moving from Florida.
Right.
Okay. Why?
Well,
I was in Tampa and I was also in LA. So no, I actually love the West Coast. But you're also going to be participating in a movie on an executive level. It's the movie about Reagan, if I recall. And I think the reason why I wanted to get into that a little bit is now segueing to this, from, if we're talking about the myth, well, let's get to the reality. Well, we're talking about liberty. Let's talk about where it comes from. It kind of comes down to what kind of people does God want us to be? If we know the liberties we have in Christ, if we know what those are, then we need to get involved in what's happening today. And so you're writing, you're part of these movies, you're actually working in secular culture. I think you're moving to a place now that's going to challenge you a little bit more missionally. That's a mindset, right? I mean, and I think sometimes Christians forget what our mindset's to be. Our mindset's not supposed to be to find a way to make sure we're really, really comfortable in this world. Our mindset's to be useful in God's hands and to jump into other people's fire. We have a program called Through the Fire, where you jump in, and well, why would anybody jump into somebody else's fire? To help get them out, So here you are, you're jumping in, you're heading out to California, you're going to be involved in all kinds of different things. And I guess I'm just asking why. and help our people realize that that's actually the excitement of the Christian life, right?
Yeah, it's a very missional minded place to be. And I think, as the Christian is always the Christ confessor. And so it's very easy for us to just put up the walls and to hide. And when things get difficult, just to stay strong. And, a book came out a little bit ago by Rod Dreher, I think, and it was the Benedict option. Right. And so, I mean, and I don't mean to, poo-poo everything there. He's got some great thoughts and ideas, but the main thing was, kind of like the church is shrinking, it's hurting, it's struggling. And so let's kind of go into not hiding, but just kind of rally and, go underground a little bit to get strong again, to kind of come out. But it's like, we are called to such a place in time as this. And so, when Christ calls you up, and so it feels like California is sort of being a call to the front lines of the culture wars. Sure. But it's God behind it. I wasn't like necessarily looking for the church that I'm at, Bethel Lutheran in Clearwater, has been an absolute delight. It's a spiritual oasis. We love them very much, and vice versa. And it's been great. But when God calls, and I look at some of the unique things that the church out there is looking for, it's a lot of Chinese in the area. My wife and I were missionaries in China, and then a lot of the interests that they have looking for very missional. They were looking for some of those connection points. So it's really cool. I think I'm uniquely suited for their particular call, and so that's why it's a God thing, and it's missional. And so it's like, here I am, Lord, send me. And so I've always been willing. If that willing vessel, if you need me, and He makes it clear, and ultimately He does. So. And
it's really interesting, because before we came on, you were talking about how the church in Clearwater was such a blessing to you, and it resourced you, and you actually, it got strong again. Well, I was in Brandon, just down the road, in Tampa. So, same kind of thing. We had an incredible time there, the churches we served there. And we went from there to New York City, to Manhattan, and people thought we were crazy. And I said, yeah, but my wife and I both are urban people. We both grown up in big cities. I mean, this is what we love. Blacktop's more normal to me than trees. And so it was kind of like, that's what, and we encountered the power of the Word of God in the middle of the craziness and the chaos of the city, but we saw it do its work, and we're like, whoa, because sometimes you think you're the real reason why these things are happening. And then you realize, no, it's this Word that, it's this Christ. And so I think that's the same spirit you have. And I just wish people understood that's the adventure that He wants for every one of us to have.
Yes, exactly.
Whether you're in the suburbs or not. I mean, you don't have to be, some of us are crazy enough to go to the edge. I get that. But there's an edge everywhere, that we are called to go. We call it dynamic differentiation, where we jump into people's lives, but we differentiate. God works to preserve and to save, and we just got to learn how to be useful in His hands. But the dynamic, we jump in. We're not the kind of people that wait for the thing to come to us. And I think that's something we're going to have to recapture, because the culture is not letting us do that like they used to in the past.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We're going to have to jump in on our own terms.
Yeah, and you got to be more creative in some of the approaches sometimes. So, so that it's a healthy challenge, I think.
Well, in closing, I just say, next time I'd sure love to talk to you about the Eric Liddell book, because Chariots of Fire was huge in my life too. I love that movie. I'm a musician too, so synthesizer, that all the music tracks and everything was
Vangelis soundtrack.
Yeah, oh yeah, exactly. And I just and it came out when we were at SEM. In fact, I don't know if you knew this, but we actually did. You remember that first scene where they run inside the quad?
Yes.
We did that. We had
really?
Mike Middendorf playing the trumpet. We were all running to the church bells, or to the bells. So yeah, we all had our white shorts on doing that kind of thing.
Oh, that is. Awesome.
It was hilarious. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun. But again, it was because we saw the spirit of a guy who was willing to lay it all on the line for the gospel.
Right.
He would even let them take away his Olympic medal or Olympic opportunity, and that's the kind of thing where going to that edge. And then you realize that Christ is sufficient there, and everything you need is already there, even if you seem to be losing everything at that moment. What a powerful thing when guys like you, who are writing books like these things, are willing to do that.
Well, yeah.
Go ahead.
Just kind of a dovetail on that. I know when I moved to China the first time, God just stripped everything away from me.
Right.
My family, my friends, my favorite foods, sports, all that kind of stuff, relationships. And then He slowly put everything back into my life, including that's where I met my wife over there. And so that's when I realized I hadn't decided to go to seminary yet either, but Nanchang, China, is where I was, is about on the globe, about as far away from Kalamazoo, Michigan, my hometown. And I realized, okay, God, like I can trust you anywhere in this planet, so it's like, I can be a pastor, and, if wherever you're going to send me, I know that you're going to be there with me. So it's living that out in that missional life.
It's a powerful thing. And we used to say it because I trained urban pastors who then went to some of the tougher places in our cities and things. And I said, in urban ministry, what happens to is you get stripped down very often. And I mean, metaphorically, stripped down to zero. Like you suddenly realize, I don't feel like I have anything anymore. And at that moment you realize, but I have Jesus and He's enough. And when you realize that, then you become this really dangerous guy, because nothing will stop you now. And we had Bible studies on Wall Street, and had stuff in Harlem. It didn't matter. We could go wherever He wanted us to go in the city and talk to the richest or the poorest people, because all we really had was Christ. And I think you learned that as a missionary, and now you're going to bring that. So I think, folks, if you want to read something that's going to really bless you, especially this Eastertide, you need to get this book, Lord of the Legends, Jesus' Redemptive Quest. You can get it at CPH, right? Is that cph.org?
Yep. Concordia House. That's right. Or
and then you can
Amazon or anywhere books are sold. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And Eric, it's just been a pleasure talking to you. God bless you. And I know we'll talk more in the future, but thanks for showing us again that some of the stuff that we cherish and read in our daily lives, actually, there's a foundational source to that. Maybe we should actually learn about that foundational source too. So God bless you and all that you're doing. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRL DC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Contained there are resources to empower your public square dynamic discipleship. Or check out our weekly Word from the Center opinion piece every Friday at facebook.com/LCRL Freedom. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Gregory Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Alert with Dr. Gregory Seltz, Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.